Well, hello everyone and good afternoon. My name is Emily Sprenger. I am an academic trainer for the Center for Teaching and Learning, and we're excited to have one of our own professors, Dr. Quincy Daniels, presenting today. He's going to be presenting foster care disparities for African American children in Wisconsin. Are we serving the needs of our African American children? And just a couple of housekeeping things that Dr. Daniels has mentioned to me. Please feel free to use the chat. If it's something that you want to, if you want to be able to chat with attendees and panelists, please make sure that you select that in the drop down option in the chat. Otherwise, it's just going to default to just panelists, which will only get to Dr. Daniels and myself. Please ask any questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get those addressed as he presents. And without further ado, I'm gonna just a brief reminder, this is being recorded and we will post this in our CTL LibGuides. And I am going to turn this over to Dr. Daniels.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I really like the opportunity to be able to share interesting stories and things that I consider really important for people to know in order for us to progress and make changes that benefit children, especially children in Wisconsin. What you see on the screen, that's my old, being my geeky self, the red pill or the blue pill. And there are some things regarding the information that I'm going to present, which after all this is over, you can either, one, take the blue pill, go back to life as normal and don't worry about it, which sometimes happens. Or you can take the red pill and understand that the disparities and things that really are going on are happening every single day. And then we see how far down the rabbit hole we're going to go with this. It's an important concept because I want people to understand that just because you're inside of system and you're working the best you can does not necessarily mean that you're affecting change. And this is pretty much the presentation that I have worked with regarding with the governor. And I will give you a couple of things on that a little later in the presentation. So we should get started. One of the things when I wanted to first come up with the idea is that I wanted to change the culture, because a lot of the things that I see in La Crosse County and things like that is that besides how I view, for African American children and how the state views African American children and how the general public views African American children, and you'll see me doing a lot of repeating, is that we need to identify there's certain things that are happening that can be improved. And since this is really personal to me, every now and then I get a little sensitive about it. So I really appreciate that you're being patient with me while we continue on in this particular process. All right, so what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to reach your emotions. Good qualitative researchers tend to do that. I want to get a call of action. I want you to see these trends of what's happening to our children. And I want a plan of action for your community, because basically it is that important. Because if we continue with as the same old day to day, nothing will change. All right. So I'll give you a little bit, like we call it, speaking from experience. All right. So I've been a foster care parent for basically about 15 years. I'm still licensed up till next year, but I think we'll be a little out of the area regarding foster care, because I think we're pretty much, after a while, my schedule's a little thin right now. But from 2004 to 2009, I was just doing the basic, hi, I want to take care of kids. And my wife and I, we tend to try to foster to adopt, because that's just the way we do it. And then I had some things go on in the foster care system. I said, that just doesn't sound right. That doesn't feel right. And it's not serving the benefits of our children. So I had to take a little break. And then things happened. We came back because kids need us. All right. So Part of my background, I serve on the governor's Child Abuse and Neglect Board, Early Childhood Development Council, and Wisconsin Technical College System Board. So a lot of the information I am drawing on most of the experiences that I've had from foster care and where I see it can be improved, as opposed to status quo, which really status quo has to go. It just does. Because after, and I'll say, make your own assessment, see what happens from this particular presentation and what you think. All right, continuing. All right, part of my personal belief, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. You see, there are so many environmental factors, conditions, and things like that that lead to children being taken out of our homes. It's literally, you have to understand that there is a major challenge here that we need to overcome. But we tend to do it a little backwards. And therefore, we need to have some ideas of how to make this better. If we're going to make it better for our kids, it has to start within the system at the policy level. All right, so speaking of which, regarding the statistics for foster care, a lot of the things you'll see here, data was collected from the Foster Care Analysis Reporting System, AFCARS, and it's going to be posted somewhere, hopefully in the chat also, so you can actually look through the system information. And when you start saying, okay, well, the numbers really look okay, until you dig deeper. The numbers really tell a really great story until you dig deeper. So let's start digging a little deeper. All right, what we have here, this is called point in placement. And point in placement for foster care basically gives you an idea that sometimes, somewhere in, say, September-ish, 2018, we take a snapshot of how many kids that are actually in the foster care system. So within that, you can see that, okay, well, over 400,000 nationally, not a big issue. What we can improve on that. 46% are basically non-relative foster family homes, 32% relative foster family homes, and then that 6% that don't quite make it because they want to be institutionalized. There's a few other percentage things, but I'm not going to go over that right now. But you need to understand that this is something that's inherent in the system. And remember, part of my whole thing going back to the matrix is that the construct of how we're supposed to treat children of color is different from the construct of children who are white. Case in point. All right, so that's point in placement. All right, point in time, you can see 44% were white, 23% were black, 21% were Hispanic, 10% were other races, 1% unknown or undetermined. All right, so now once you're in the system, what's the percentage of kids that actually leave the system successfully? So 46% were white. So everything you can look on here that tells you that we're not getting kids out of the system. Half of the kids that usually show up in the system are going to ride through the system and get this until they're an adult. That is scary to me. All right, 21% are Black or African American. So what I'm thinking of is like literally, if you take 10 kids, we're going to say that a little more, 8 kids out of the 10 are not going to make it out of the system. That just, when you start looking at it, and I'm going, there has to be something better than this. So I said, why is it happening that way? And we need to figure that out. So here's one of the things about foster care that I've had to learn how to navigate. We're only 35% of the foster population, and yet there's, but 9% of the state population. Something doesn't bear out. The things that tend to happen in foster care is that you have an idea that the system is supposed to support the children, that will help them achieve, be supported, have some form of background. Parents are going to work for your unification, and then lo and behold, everything is back and kumbaya, everybody's hugging and it's all good. Unfortunately, those are not the facts, not most of the time. All right, so I like this particular game. Let's go and play Connect the Dots. All right, so overrepresentation. Yes, we know this has gone on for a number of years. And nationally, African American children, 25%. And then you're looking at 14% in the general population. And that just seems, the numbers still didn't get to where I wanted when I'm asking questions as a foster care parent. And I'll get to that a little bit later because the foster care system is really, I'm not going to call it what I really wanted to call it. If you want to adopt a child, there are so many steps that has to happen in order for that to be effective. So we'll get to there. All right. So we're going to talk about this particular area. Let's say parent group A being white, parent group B being black, have the same particular issue, and children are going to be evaluated in whether they're going to have home support or they're going to go into the foster care system. Now, when you dig deeper into the numbers, African American children, 77% more likely to be removed from the home. And if we know this, why aren't we changing this? Because remember the thing about the matrix, the policies and things like that, there's a construct and it's out there. The system is out there. I want you to think the old movie, The Matrix. It's like, all right, what is the construct? The construct says this group of people is designed to succeed. This group of people is designed to fail. The system does not serve African American children. Not at the rate for white children. Those are just some of the facts of the matter. All right, let me keep going. All right, so contributing factors. Efforts to address disproportionality, disparities, and the complexities. Now, there's a few things that tend to happen on this. Well, let's see. You have racial bias, poverty, disproportionate need. Studies all over the place that tell you the same thing over and over and over. And yet, this has been going on, what, 40 years, 50 years longer? And we still are trying to figure it out. Now, me being the old thinking person that I am, I always go, if the system is not changing, maybe it's that the policymakers at the top levels do not want the system to be changed. It is just that when you start looking at some of the things that I'm going to show you, we'll talk about it. All right, so over here I said, let's go ahead and do a little research, find out if there's a particular framework in the African American disproportionality, disparity, and the child welfare system. Out of this time, this area over here, I want to concentrate on the human decision making. Because in our particular framework, if it doesn't look like, act like, walk like, talk like, be like majority members, then obviously there's something that they're going to decide on which might be biased. Those are the facts regarding where people are coming in and doing certain things for our kids, deciding where they're going to go, what they're going to do, how they're going to navigate this system that we have and be supportive in all this. But literally, we have a lot of things that we're working on. Inconsistent decision making, because if we always say if it is a standard system, we should get a standard result. And that qualitative type researcher that I am go, the numbers may look all right, but you got to dig deeper to find out why do we continue to have this problem? And it comes down to lack of cultural competence. But let's continue and we'll get back to that. All right, disproportionate needs, socioeconomic conditions. I'm flying through this on this one. All right, attributes that may continue. Parents' increased likelihood of maltreating children under their care. Now, here's one of the things about if you're going to provide services at home, you might get a better outcome. Or you remove the children, then they give you this checklist that you have to, you know, complete if you're going to get your child back. So it's always interesting to note that 77% thing that I said before, but we shall see. So let's talk this in. Substance abuse, mental illness, parental incarceration, domestic violence, homelessness, and unemployment. All of these things may be within certain areas, urban communities, and things like that. But part of this, in that construct, are we trying to destroy the Black or African American family? Just thinking, just thinking. All right, so let's talk about this particular thing with community level risk factors. If you don't have, if you have limited access to mental health services, for example, affordable housing, employment, all within your community that technically is not there, then somewhere down the line, does that equate to criminality? But you don't know until people actually want to look in and take a good look. All right, stick with me. All right, that part I was talking about, bias, inconsistent decision making, lack of cultural competence. This is going to be, when I share my little story, you'll find out a couple of little things on how all this seems to work in conjunction with things, because I believe that we are so media driven that every time you see an African American on TV, we have the orange jumpsuit. Every time you start coming up with some certain ideas about what we're capable of doing, oh, well, that doesn't go with society's view. If there's something that's out there that's impacting your ability to judge a person, and if you're getting fed just this continual diet of negative imagery and African Americans, you just start associating. So you get this thing with inconsistent decision making, because as we go through the court system, which is what I'm going to tell you how it worked, that lack of cultural competence jumps right out. Okay, all right, I'm doing that preaching thing. I'm trying to lighten that up. All right, so here's this thing that I call with disparity and disproportionality. Vague legal terms get a bad product for our kids. Best interest of the child. Now, it's real interesting of who's making that determination of best interest of the child. Those are concepts that we can really work with if we understand that if you're going to affect change, it's going to have to be at the policy level. The legal standard in foster care is so indeterminate I believe it renders it not helpful. Really, it does. Okay. So here comes my real world story. All right. So, Child X. Child X, basically, African American, 4-year-old child, has been in foster care system for 2 years. So literally half of his life has been being passed from home to home to home to home. Now, Child X, the parents, they're doing their bit. They're working for reunification. They're trying to do everything they can to get their son back, which seems to be something that's actually a good thing. But what ends up happening, in many times, Child X has been placed so many times in so many places that they said, well, I'm sorry, behavior's out of control, hitting people, doing certain things, throwing out, destroying things, and to the point where the social workers said, fine, we're just going to go ahead and put him in a mental institution at 4. Somewhere, if you're not going to chat, you're trying to change the child, and they start talking about, I know there are reasons to actually medicate, but why in the world would you want to medicate a 4-year-old child that has already been traumatized? But Stick with me. I'm going to continue to lay out some hard information. All right, so child X removed from the home, passed to different foster care parents to people who were majority members. 100% of the social workers involved in the case are white. 100% of the law enforcement personnel that the child has seen were white. 100% of the support staff, both birth to 3, were white. I'm seeing a pattern. So when you start looking at what's going to happen, 100% of the court-appointed attorneys were white. 100% of the judges that made decisions were white. 100% of pre-K teachers were white. In other words, in all facets of his young life, he's been exposed to all this information, all this data, because their brain, they're sponges. Everything is telling him that the people who are going to be in charge are going to be white. And somehow we used to say indoctrination starts early. Dr. Eddie Moore, founder of the White Privilege Conference, says this particular quote: racism is a pigment of the imagination, and we can do better. If we call it out, we recognize what's happening to our children, we can do better. That's the whole point. All right, so in between that, guess what? This is child X. This is my son. Because they were on their way to the mental institution and said, let's go ahead and see if Quincy and his wife will actually go ahead and see what they like to hold on to him. And we're like, oh, another child? Oh, not a problem. He's 6 years old now. But at 4, they were going to take this child, African-American child, and put him in an institution because he's out of control. Let me see. The very first day we got him, it's like, yeah, we sat at the table, ate dinner and all this. And then we went to the water park like most other kids and families do. Somewhere you establish, here's the acceptable behavior. Here's what we're doing consistently. And lo and behold, well, we think you're doing wonderful with this child. I'm like, no, we're just parenting. Parenting matters. But if you're going to continue to do, I'll call it denigrate, see our children as less than they are for majority kids, how many other people are being institutionalized because, oh, the behavior is too bad? We can't really, is the behavior too bad, or are we just not culturally competent? Just thinking. All right. I get on my high horse. But here's another thing, that for every happy ending, there is an unhappy ending. Child D came to our house twice. First one, she was just this wonderful kid, 6 months old, and she would just try to ride on my back playing in the yard or whatever, and it was just great. But then parents got it together, and then they dropped the ball again. So they decided, well, we're going to have to go and put them in the foster care system one more time. But now remember, this is like 6, and then 6 years of age or something like that. And they said, okay, we found another relative, and we're going to go ahead. And this is after spending about a year in my house, and we're trying to adopt, and it just wasn't going to work because we kept going. Why don't we get to have a voice at the table? In the foster care system, foster parents are treated like the help. You do not have a voice at the table. You do not get to go ahead and do all the things that you would like to regarding educational services, but we'll get to that later. All right, so she was reunified, and every time in and out of foster care. But they found a relative in Mississippi. In Mississippi, they were going to go through, and now you are off the books financially. Because one of the goals is to get off the books after a certain age, and then we don't have to worry about it. So in this, what I call the unhappy ending, this person that was in Mississippi, well, the proper vetting was not done. Okay, all right. I will keep my composure. Within a year, we were contacted. Child D was hospitalized for starvation, beaten, left bound to a rug where there were repeated assaults. Repeated. Because we just don't matter. All at the ripe old age of 6. Can you imagine the trauma that goes on with a 6-year-old tied to a rug? Everybody taking a turn. But yet, this is what ends up happening. Moved back to Wisconsin saying, oh, we're so sorry. We're going to put you back in foster care system. No harm, no foul, no harm. We're good. We can do better. Our kids deserve better. As long as we are continuing to be culturally insufficient with decision makers, we're just going to get more of the same. And that's opinion. So, let me see. I need to do something, possibly stop share. All right, I'll do that. Take a little moment. See if we have anything going on. All right. Goodness, we do have a lot.
We do. We have a few things, lots of things in the chat, and just what you just shared was absolutely heartbreaking. But I do want to get to some of the questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
If that's okay first. And then if you want to address anything in the chat, we're welcome to. Negus asks, Blacks from Milwaukee represent 95% of those incarcerated statewide. African American continue to be removed from their homes at rates disproportionate to the percentage in the population. How can we curtail this negative representation of this marginalized group?
Exactly where we're starting today. You have to spotlight it. The things that end up happening with the people who are in charge, the policymakers, you have to have your place at the table. Because up until then, the people who are the place at the table happen to be majority members making decisions for children of color. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'm trying to get on there, but it's not going to be just me. It's going to take people, when I go through and say we're really better together, is when the outrage is so much that we don't let that happen to one more child. Okay, I'm doing it again. Oops.
For that. I do have 2 more. And I think that Kate asked this question about stats. And I think this is in relation to children in foster care. So please, if you need to expand on it, Kate, feel free to. She says, have stats changed over time? For example, from the 40s to the 70s to the 90s to today?
Actually, because that part is coming up too.
Oh, okay.
No, that's a good question. What ends up happening is that over a period of time, you can see the stats coming down, but it's not at a rate that's going to keep up with other people, other majority members. But what ends up happening, and I'll jump one or a few slides up, is that for every 5,000 white families you have that do foster care, you have 800 African American foster care families. And the first thing I did was go, why is that? If our kids are getting to be taken out of our homes at 77%, why can't we have more African American families? I don't know. That's one of those questions that as soon as I can get around the table, I get a lot of sawdust, soft shoe. Because if you call it out and then you demand change, and you demand it at the policy level, then it gets a little better. But we're working on that.
And a table question, and then this will be the last one, and then we can take it. But Marie asks, why don't we have a place at the table? This has been decades. And you kind of talked about it a little bit, but I don't know if you want to expand further.
Well, a lot of the things with places at the table is that you have to have leadership that want you at the table. Because as we already figured out, people who are in power or the decision makers, if you bring in anybody of color, then you're dealing with the matter of race. And sometimes people have a tendency, oh, well, I just want to be comfortable with people that look like, act like, walk like, talk like myself. So if you're a little bit on the outside of it, it doesn't work for them. Okay, all right, I'm doing it again. Sorry about that. Was that the last question or so?
That's the last one in the Q&A. There was a lot of conversation in the chat, but I don't think we can get to all of it.
Okay. Well, let me push on to the next subject so I can give you an idea of what they call post-traumatic slave syndrome, which will give us a better idea. All right, let me share the screen again. It takes me forever trying. I have like 4 different screens, so it's always a challenge. Okay, here we go. Number here. Okay.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on, and then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes, so 300 years of trauma, no help, freed, no help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African American experience, starting with slavery, as a real clear, long enduring trauma. So I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as, well, cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behaviors. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response is, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fair, his uncle's an astronaut. She's just oozing. She realizes the black mother's son is actually excelling her son. And she says, well, wait a minute. Your son's the one that's really coming along. And the black mother responds, oh my God, he's a handful, but oh, he just works my nerves. Now, when I'm working with African American people, it doesn't matter what the audience is. It doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs and goes, of course, there's a secret. Because everybody black knows that even though the black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this black mother is working in the fields and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she gonna say? No, he's not. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. PTSD is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be there to actually get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You could just hear about something horrific happening to someone you love. So you have people who have experienced it firsthand, people who have witnessed it in their environment, right? People who are continuing to be oppressed. That exacerbates any possibility of healing. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, because then it becomes part of what we call your socialization process. So you begin to normalize a way of living and being, everything from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend. You know, all of these things are colored by history. And if you don't understand it, you're going to fold in things that you've just assumed are normal. But post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future. There was a point where there were, you know, African-American children in different urban settings that didn't expect to live to be adults because they saw so much death, that they started planning their funerals like at 13, 12, as young as 10. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on health. And while we look at general stress, you know finances, you have illnesses, all these different things. How about being Black? How does factoring in being Black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it compromises the immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it. Because you see, it's habitual. You socialize. It becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you begin to address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can use it. I think the first order of business is beginning to have a conversation. And the other is to educate the larger society. You have to stop the assault. So this is not purely a clinical thing. This requires social justice and change. That's where part of the healing is. It's not in a clinical setting or in a pill. It's in fairness and justice and safety and equity. We got to work with some of those clinical things, some of those issues of panic and anxiety. And we also have to deal with the fact that you have a system that is set up to oppress you and to continue to injure you. Both those things have to be dealt with. And they cannot singularly by themselves affect a change. They have to be done collectively.
Right. So as you can see, there's a couple of things that I would like you to understand is that we have a lot of things that we can account for. The things that we can actually go and make a difference in is how we treat kids, how we value kids, how we can actually work within the system, but we cannot keep being patient in the system. It's hard to do. It is. And the things that we have experienced over 15 years is that we've probably taken care of anywhere from 75 to 80 kids. And of the 80 kids, we've tried to go through the adoption process for 4 of them. So it is a challenge. And whether you have your PhD, master's, bachelor's, high school, whenever you're the foster care parents, you do not get the place at the table. So those are things that we're working hard to kind of change up. Those are things that we really want to have work. Those are things that when you start valuing people in society, it makes a difference. But once again, it also starts at the leadership level. If the leaders actually take an interest and say, this is how we're going to do things, this is what we need to do, this is how it gets done, you'd be surprised that you can affect change in your local community. Because a lot of the things that we do for foster care can be done pretty much almost any different level in any particular organization. But it really does start with someone here saying this needs to change. That's just part of the process. So let me see here. Go back and we'll do a little bit more before we go question and answers.
Quincy,
And
would you mind, Dr.
yes,
James? I'm so sorry. Would you mind just letting me know what the name of that video is so that I can throw it in the chat in the Q&A? Do you know it?
oh, uh, post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Thank you.
I worked with Dr. DeGroot for, oh boy, about 5 years.
I'll go ahead and
So,
I will go ahead and I'll look it up and I'll throw it in the chat. Thank you.
okay. All right. Not a problem. All right. So if we're going to follow the dots again, I always start with the idea of placement dynamics. So we're going to go ahead and say, yep, we had to remove the child, but we're going to have the first goal, which is reunification. We're going to have the next goal is kinship care in case the foster care system, we always want to try to find somebody in the family. Here is my personal experience, and it's not going to be about my narratives, but a lot of people will say, well, gee, you took care of so many children. Why did they keep sending them elsewhere? We passed legislation in Wisconsin, and it was like, oh my gosh, it took forever. It's just about a year to get a bill through up to the governor to sign, where literally, if the foster care parents, were willing to adopt, there is a 2-year wait before you can terminate parental rights because we figure we want to keep giving out, ideas. We want to give people many more chances, and I'm all for chances. But if I can make a prediction that the bad people that were doing bad things to kids and continue to do bad things for kids, we need to speed that process up. So what ended up generating all of this was the idea that if you are doing something like literally physically brutalizing children, let's terminate now, not later, now. Not because you had a bad day, now. And it's just, I literally had to go and ping every representative and go, here's what I want. Can you put yes or no? Do not give me the politics of it. I just want yes or no. And when you get people involved, it's like, so you want people to be able to brutalize children? Yes? Well, no. Okay, then. It seems pretty simple to me, but we have to actually pass it at the policy level if you're going to affect change. It's just that important. One more child is one more child too many. Okay, let me continue before I get off on my high horse again. All right, so foster care placement. And then we say, let's look at how long we're supposed to be in foster care. 20 months. And then we dig a little deeper. This is what happens in the foster care system when you are a foster care parent. You get authorized 2 days a month for respite care. Respite care basically is, oh my gosh, I've had so much work to do with that foster care child. I'm just going to go ahead and hand this person over to another family just so I can get a little break and I can relax and it'll be okay. Well, let's say you want to go on a 3-day vacation. Sometimes they'll hand the child off and then they'll to another family and then they'll come back. And, it's kind of the interesting thing about how this applies to vacations or holidays and things like that. So this is what we call messaging. 15 years of being a foster care parent, we accrued a total of 360 respite days because we didn't take any. If a child is in our home, the child is in our home. But some people don't really connect with the child that's in their home for some strange, odd reason. If I'm good enough to take care of your child and they want me to take care, then the child should be taken care of. I understand that. But what is the messaging that we're sending to the children? Oh, well, we're going to have like Christmas. We're not going to spend on your child, but we're going to give them the donated toys. And meanwhile, the big giant pile for the biological children, and they get 2 or 3 toys. It just sends the wrong message, at least in my opinion. So, yeah, well, I already talked about it, but you should understand that. But I don't think, I want to make sure I have enough time on here. if we're going to do better for our kids, we're going to have to do better for our kids. The things that we need to understand, it's a process, and we can change this process if we just go through and understand some of the basics. Treat people the way you would like to be treated. If there's certain actions, and this, we used to say, what is the most segregated day in the United States? We used to say Sunday. Here's another interesting fact. What is the most segregated time for foster care? You show children of color and they're being moved over to people who are a little different, who may not have the experiences, who may not have the background because of some of the professional development that they would normally have if you had certain challenges. You know, you want to have people that are familiar with, if I'm going to hand you my child, you need to know how to take care of my child. I've been to a few of the trainings. You get about 2 hours cultural competency training, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to understand. Training is effective if it's continuous. And right now, we still can do better. If we had this thing called, I asked an interesting question. I'm like, oh, wow, let's try to reverse engineer this. Since for the first 5 years, I was like, okay, well, we've taken every child of color, Hmong, Black, it doesn't matter. So give me an idea. When are we going to do better for our children? Because they basically come in and they stay in. And if they remove them from our house to go somewhere else, do we get to see follow-up? Is there something in place that we can track and say, yes, this was a successful outcome? But normally what I've seen is that people are being passed on left and right. Let's see. I'm checking the chat again. Make a child should be included in all events. Yeah, I agree. What do you call it? Preaching to the choir. The big thing is, and oh, I see.
Go ahead, finish your thought. There's several in the Q&A
Okay.
if you want to address them.
There's just enough things out there that says the system, the construct, is not designed to get our kids out of the system, and that the people who are caring for our children need more training. But that's my thought. Okay, go ahead.
No, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing this information. I do have a question on a personal note. Like, what can we do? What's the first step we could take to try to help advocate for safety and well-being of foster children?
The first thing I would do is you got to pick up the phone or get on the computer and type it out. Go to the representative in your district and say, what is the foster care policy for children of color? It's like, how many, if they can't tell you how long or something in their district, these children are staying in the system. Are they coming out of the system? Are they exiting the system? But you gotta, we used to say, intent is fine, action is better. It's just a matter of starting that way.
Thank you so much. Several questions in the Q&A. Negus asks, is transitional justice the appropriate method to dismantle this dilemma?
Oh, that's a good one.
Negus has had some really, really good comments in the chat.
No, it's like, I'm all for anything that helps kids be kids. Can you imagine the trauma of going there and being ripped away from your family? And this is one of the things I really hate. They use trash bags. I can't stand trash bags. It's like, no, we will buy them some form of things to put their clothes in. And they continually, in 15 years, they always use trash bags to throw in some clothes, and here you go. And I'm like, what is the message we're sending? And they're like, oh, Quincy, you're always intense about this. It's like, yeah, I am. Because what you're creating is a second-class culture that expects to die earlier and always have to do the, I call it, and excuse the term, step and fetch. We are better than that. Or as they say, our ancestors didn't survive all of this for us to just be put up by people who don't care. We can do better. And the best way we can do it, you start with training and you give foster parents a place at the table. And there's some that say, well, it should be a Bill of Rights for foster care. So I agree, because really it takes all of us to be better for the kids. And I think that we just need to get out and understand that when you have legislators that can make these decisions, one, who really don't have a lot of cultural competency, two, always think of the budget first. I'm like, wow, the budget isn't going to feed my children. It's not going to show them how to be a good person. And that school to prison pipeline that they like to do. Let me give you some other facts about Wisconsin. We are absolutely the worst state in the nation regarding African-American imprisonment, women in childbirth that lose children, all these other things. It seems Wisconsin just seems to be this big thing that is bad for African-Americans. So therefore, in small steps, I'm trying to change it, but I can't do it by myself. It has to be better together, because that's the way, when you get a group of committed people that want to do an action, we can change the world. Okay, I'm doing that preachy thing again.
Oh my gosh, no, absolutely. It's great. Okay, so let's see. We have another question in the Q&A. What do we do as parents when the system is knocking at the door? They want our children. They are either ignoring our children or overly involved.
Right. And I take it back to that thing where they start talking about, well, you denigrate your own children so they won't get, you won't take them away. Here is one of the major facts that I had for coming into our house. Anytime you have a person in the majority member who can come in and take your kids, that is a power distribution. So we always have to act a certain way. Because if we end up acting where we're aggressive or anything like that, oh, well, they're too aggressive and those poor kids, we need to remove them. So it's always a process that you have to understand how to navigate being Black in America, non-threatening, and just do your job. And yet that's something we have to navigate every single day. And it is exhausting. Okay, well, I'm doing it again, sorry.
No, there's so many people that are like, preach on in the chat. So we appreciate it. So Cheryl asks, you kind of mentioned this in the chat, but she has a follow-up question to her statement. Exactly, if you decide to take a child, the child should be included in all events. And that was in relation to your Christmas example, for example. They're not a job, they're a human. They're a little helpless human. Should not that be the understanding and qualifications of fostering to include that child in every facet of the family? So I guess kind of what are those requirements laid out when you're a foster parent, or is that not even an expectation?
What happens is a lot of people will say, okay, you're going to be a foster parent. And then you get 3 days of training typically. And then you may have an ongoing training, maybe, but they'll do the background and all this. The background is different from training. And the support system is like, I'm not going to say suspect, but for people who leave, and that was going to be in the upcoming slides, but 30 to 50% of foster care parents leave in the first year. It's like, you can't pay me to fight inside the system. When I ask for support and it's not there, or we will get there. And you see, the problem is you have so many on the case list. The social workers, bless their heart, they're trying to work with it. But I've been here 15 years. I have yet to see one social worker of color. And then I go over to human resources over there going, when are you going to hire some people that look like me? And they're like, oh, we just can't find candidates. And I'm like, wow, historically Black college or university, they usually graduate every year like we do. And I just go, okay, all right. But it makes people, what is it? Because they literally, with all the kids that we have fostered, we're in our house, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And I always say, this is the big determining factor of whether you think you are safe. It's like I'll make coffee or tea or whatever. I'm like, hi, would you like to have a cup of coffee or would you like to have tea? In 15 years, we have one person. One. Because everybody else was uncomfortable. And I just go, well, here we go again. So it comes back to really, like I'm looking at a chat box, policy.
Yeah.
We can talk till we're blue in the face, but until you develop policy that says this is what the standards are going to be, we're just going to keep saying it, and hopefully somebody is going to actually listen. And eventually, but foster care is going to change over a period of time. It's just we have to do it together. Because I've been doing it a long time and I'm tired, but I'll take a break and then I'll get back in the fight. And for the people that are out there that want to do the work is always going to be there. It just is. So the more you can interact and show people that, well, we're really not totally militant or, hyper, whatever you would like to call us, and that we're not all thugs, gangsters, and all this other garbage that's being fed by the media. We just want to live and raise our children. Okay, all right. Anyhow.
I do have one more question that I'd like to try to get finished before our session is up. There's a question about respite days.
Yes.
For respite days, are foster children not allowed to travel on vacation with the family?
Oh, you can travel, but you always have to get permission if you're going to say go out of state, because we're right by Minnesota. So we like to do the geeky thing of going to the Renaissance Festival, or we'll go to the Science Museum, but you always have to ask permission. But you see, a respite care, you might, well, we're going to drop you off while we go spend the day. So once again, what's the messaging for our kids?
Right. So would respite care, like, for example, if you're a foster parent, if you go to dinner and you have another family member, like babysit all of your kids, right? Is that included in respite care, or is that just, do you have to get permission, I guess I should say?
You're still going to go through the permission tree. It's just,
Okay.
It's a real big challenge, but once you've been in the system, it takes a while. But a lot of the things that we can do is that if the group of people just start to act and say, well, what is it? And what are the stats? And how is this working? And make people actually respond, because especially the way we are so polarized right now. And I say, I could give a, about polarization. What's good for kids? That's it. But man, I really appreciate it. It's like everybody who came in and had a good conversation. It's like, help me fight it. That's all I was like. I would like to just have people jump in there, because that's the way it works. That's how change happens.
Absolutely. And first of all, I know everybody has said wonderful things about you as a presenter, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share this information. I know there's probably a few more questions in the chat that we didn't get time to address today, but there's only so much you can fit into an hour. And I will have this recorded and posted in the Center for Teaching and Learning in our LibGuide section. We've moved from the Commons to LibGuide. So if anybody needs a copy of this, please let me know. And Dr. Daniels, thank you so much for your passion. And
I toned it down. I did tone it down, so I thought I did a little better.
Great. It was wonderful. We appreciate you all so much. And thank you everyone for attending today's session.
All right. Bye.